Don't speak. A poor little girl saved the CEO's son after uncovering a shocking secret. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and type "love" in the comments. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. Great news awaits you. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Riverside Elementary's playground as 5-year-old Mia Chen watched the other children from behind the rusty chain-link fence. Her worn sneakers, held together with duct tape her mother had carefully applied that morning, kicked at loose gravel while she waited for her mother to finish her shift cleaning the school offices. The soles were so thin she could feel every pebble beneath her feet. But Mia had learned not to complain about such things. Through the fence she could see the fancy cars lined up for pickup, sleek BMWs and Mercedes that gleamed like jewels under the afternoon light, vehicles that cost more than her family made in several years combined. The contrast wasn't lost on her young mind. She'd grown up understanding the invisible barriers that separated her world from theirs. "Mama always says rich people live in different worlds," Mia whispered to her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Patches, whose missing eye had been replaced with a bright blue button her mother had sewn on during one of their quiet evenings together. The rabbit was her constant companion, a gift from better times that had somehow survived their journey from apartment to apartment as her mother searched for steady work. The playground buzzed with the laughter of children whose biggest worry was whether they'd get ice cream after dinner, while Mia knew her own dinner would likely be leftover rice with whatever vegetables her mother could afford from the discount bin at Chang's Market. She didn't resent these children their good fortune, but she wondered sometimes what it would feel like to run without worrying about wearing out her only pair of shoes. That's when she noticed him. A boy older than her sat alone in the back of a black limousine that seemed to stretch halfway down the block, his small hands gripping a pair of silver crutches that gleamed expensively in the fading light. His sandy blonde hair was perfectly styled in a way that spoke of professional care, and his clothes looked like they came from the glossy magazine pictures her mother sometimes lingered over in the grocery store checkout line. Everything about him screamed wealth and privilege, from his spotless shoes to the way he held himself with the practiced posture of someone trained in proper etiquette. But his green eyes, visible even through the tinted window, held the same profound loneliness Mia recognized in her own reflection during the quiet moments when she thought no one was watching. It was the look of a child who had everything money could buy, but none of the things that truly mattered. The boy pressed his face against the tinted window, his breath fogging the glass as he watched the other children play with an expression of such intense longing that it made Mia's chest ache. She found herself moving closer to the fence, drawn by something she couldn't name. Perhaps the universal recognition that passes between lonely souls, regardless of the circumstances that created their isolation. When their eyes met through the layers of glass and metal barriers that separated their worlds, the boy's face lit up with genuine surprise, as if he hadn't expected anyone to truly see him. The transformation was remarkable. For just a moment, he looked like any other 8-year-old who had spotted a potential friend. He rolled down the window slightly, just enough to create a small opening between their separate universes. "Hi," he said softly, his voice carrying a slight tremor that suggested he wasn't entirely sure this interaction was allowed. "Hi," Mia replied, clutching Mr. Patches tighter against her chest. The rabbit's soft fabric provided comfort in this moment of unexpected connection. "I'm Mia. What's your name?" "Tommy," he answered, glancing nervously toward the front of the car where a stern-faced driver sat motionless behind the wheel, his eyes occasionally flicking to the rearview mirror to monitor his young passenger. "Tommy Blackstone." The name meant nothing to Mia. She was only 5 after all, and the world of corporate dynasties and business empires existed far beyond her understanding. But she could see with perfect clarity that Tommy was scared of something, his knuckles white where he gripped his crutches, his shoulders tense in a way that spoke of constant vigilance. He kept looking over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to suddenly appear and end their brief moment of connection. "Are you okay?" Mia asked, pressing her face against the cool metal fence, the chain links leaving temporary impressions on her cheek. Something in Tommy's demeanor reminded her of the stray cats in her neighborhood, always ready to run, always watching for danger. Tommy started to answer, his mouth opening to form words that might have bridged the gap between their worlds, but the driver suddenly turned around with military precision. His voice cut through the air like a blade. "Master Thomas, your father's instructions were clear. No talking to strangers." The window rolled up immediately with a soft mechanical whir, cutting off their conversation as effectively as a curtain falling at the end of a play. But not before Mia saw Tommy mouth the words that would haunt her dreams. "Help me." His lips moved with desperate clarity, and his green eyes held a terror that no child should ever have to carry. As the limousine pulled away with the smooth silence of expensive engineering, Mia stood frozen at the fence, her small hands gripping the chain link so tightly that the metal left marks on her palms. Something was very wrong with that boy. Every instinct her young mind possessed told her so. The way he held himself, the fear in his eyes, the desperate plea for help, it all pointed to a darkness that money and privilege couldn't hide. That night, Mia sat in their small apartment above Chang's Corner Market, picking at her dinner of rice and vegetables while her mother, Lynn, sorted through bills at their kitchen table. The stack of papers seemed to grow taller each month, despite Lynn's tireless work cleaning offices and homes throughout the city. The flickering fluorescent light above made everything look pale and tired, casting shadows that danced across the worn linoleum floor. Their apartment was tiny, just 2 rooms that served as bedroom, living room, and dining room, with a bathroom barely large enough for one person and a kitchenette that consisted of a hot plate, a mini refrigerator, and a sink that only produced cold water. But Lynn had made it home through sheer determination and love, hanging cheerful curtains she'd sewn herself, and filling their small space with the warmth of unconditional maternal devotion. "Mama," Mia said carefully, setting down her chopsticks and choosing her words with the precision of someone who had learned early that the wrong question could bring worry lines to her mother's already burdened face. "Do you know the Blackstone family?" Lynn's chopstick stopped halfway to her mouth, suspended in the air as if time itself had paused. Her dark eyes, usually so warm and encouraging, suddenly filled with a wariness that made Mia's stomach clench with apprehension. "Why do you ask, little one?" "I met a boy today. Tommy Blackstone. He seemed sad." Lynn set down her chopsticks with deliberate care and looked at her daughter with the serious expression she reserved for their most important conversations. "The Blackstones own half this city, Mia. Richard Blackstone's company employs thousands of people, including many from our neighborhood. He's very powerful, very wealthy, and very—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Particular about his privacy." "But what about Tommy?" Lynn's expression grew troubled, as if she were weighing how much truth a 5-year-old could handle. "I've heard rumors," she said quietly, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper as if the walls might be listening and reporting back to powerful people who could make their already difficult life impossible. "About the boy being different. Some say he's not well, that the family keeps him hidden away from public view. There are whispers about accidents, about treatments, about why he's never seen at the social events where other wealthy children appear." "What kind of different?" "Some say he can't walk properly, that he needs special equipment to get around. Others whisper about his mind, suggesting that he's not typical. But these are just whispers, Mia, the kind of gossip that spreads through cleaning crews and service workers who catch glimpses of lives they're not supposed to fully see. Rich people's business is not our business, and asking too many questions about powerful families can lead to—" She trailed off, but Mia understood the unspoken warning. But Mia couldn't shake the image of Tommy's frightened green eyes, or the way he'd mouthed, "Help me," before disappearing behind tinted glass and expensive steel. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of golden-haired boys trapped behind walls of money and privilege. 3 days later, Mia was helping her mother deliver freshly cleaned uniforms to Blackstone Corporate Tower when she saw him again. The building itself was a monument to wealth and power, rising 60 stories into the Seattle sky like a glass and steel finger pointing toward heaven. The lobby alone was larger than some apartment buildings, all marble and crystal and subtle lighting that made everyone inside look important and successful. This time, Tommy was in the underground parking garage, struggling to get out of the limousine with his crutches while his father stood nearby, checking his phone with obvious impatience. The parking garage was a cavern of concrete and shadows, filled with luxury vehicles that represented more money than most people would see in their lifetimes. Richard Blackstone was exactly what Mia expected a rich, powerful man to look like. Tall and imposing, sharp-suited in a way that spoke of custom tailoring and unlimited budgets, with silver hair that caught the harsh fluorescent lighting and eyes as cold as winter mornings in the Pacific Northwest. His presence seemed to fill the space around him, commanding attention and respect through sheer force of personality and accumulated power. But it was his voice that made Mia's blood run cold, cutting through the concrete cavern with the sharp edge of absolute authority. "Tomorrow, Tommy. Tomorrow you tell them everything we practiced. Remember, if you mess this up, there will be consequences that extend far beyond anything you can imagine." Tommy's small voice was barely audible, almost swallowed by the echo of the parking garage. "But Daddy, what if I don't want to?" "What you want doesn't matter," Richard snapped, his voice echoing off the concrete walls with the finality of a judge's gavel. "You're going to do exactly as I say when I say it, how I say it. Do you understand me? Your comfort, your feelings, your childish concerns are irrelevant. You exist to serve the family's interests, nothing more." Mia crouched behind a concrete pillar, her heart pounding so loudly she was afraid they might hear it. This wasn't how fathers were supposed to talk to their children. She knew this with the certainty that comes from being raised with love, even in poverty. Her own mother, despite their financial struggles and the constant stress of making ends meet, spoke to her with warmth and kindness, treating her like a precious gift rather than an inconvenience. This felt dangerous, wrong on a level that made her young soul recoil in instinctive horror. Tommy nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face in silver tracks that caught the harsh light. "Yes, Daddy." "Good. Now stop crying before someone sees you. Blackstones don't cry, they don't show weakness, and they certainly don't embarrass the family name with public displays of emotion. Pull yourself together immediately." As they walked toward the elevator, Mia caught a glimpse of papers in Richard's briefcase, documents with official seals and legal letterheads that suggested serious business was being conducted. She couldn't read the words, her kindergarten education not yet advanced enough for legal terminology, but she understood enough to know they were important, the kind of papers that adults handled with gravity and concern. When the elevator doors closed with a soft chime, Mia remained hidden behind the pillar, processing what she'd witnessed with the clarity that sometimes comes to children who haven't yet learned to rationalize away their instincts. Whatever Richard Blackstone was planning, it involved forcing his own son to lie about something serious, something that required legal documents and official proceedings. And tomorrow, whatever he was orchestrating was going to happen. The next morning, Mia convinced her mother to let her walk to school alone, claiming she wanted to stop by the public library first to look at picture books. Lynn, already running late for her morning cleaning shift at the medical building downtown, agreed with the distracted air of a woman juggling too many responsibilities on too little sleep. "Stay on the main streets, don't talk to strangers, and be at school before the first bell," Lynn instructed, pressing a soft kiss to her daughter's forehead. "And remember, if anyone asks why you're alone, you're at work and trust me to be responsible." Mia finished, reciting the explanation they'd practiced for situations like this. At 5, she was already more independent than many children twice her age, necessity having taught her skills that privilege often delayed in others. Instead of heading to the library, Mia positioned herself across the street from Blackstone Corporate Tower, clutching Mr. Patches and settling into the doorway of a closed shop that provided both concealment and a clear view of the building's main entrance. The morning was crisp and clear, with the kind of Seattle sunshine that made the glass tower gleam like a beacon of power and influence. At exactly 9 o'clock, the black limousine pulled up to the building's main entrance with the precision of a military operation. Mia watched as Richard Blackstone emerged first, straightening his tie and checking his reflection in the car window with the vanity of someone accustomed to being photographed and scrutinized. Every movement spoke of practiced confidence and complete control over his environment. Then came Tommy, moving slowly with his crutches, each step clearly requiring effort and concentration. His face was pale and drawn, marked by the kind of exhaustion that comes from sleepless nights spent dreading the morning. The contrast between father and son was striking. Where Richard moved with aggressive confidence, Tommy seemed to shrink into himself, as if hoping to become small enough to escape notice. Father and son entered the building together, but Mia noticed something that made her stomach turn. Richard kept his hand firmly on Tommy's shoulder throughout their walk to the entrance, not in the comforting way her own mother might guide her, but like he was steering him, controlling his movements with the subtle pressure of ownership rather than love. Mia knew she couldn't follow them inside past the security guards and reception desk, but she remembered something her mother had mentioned about the building having a children's play area in the lobby for employee families. If she could somehow get inside and observe without being noticed. 20 minutes later, during a busy moment when security was distracted by a delivery of office supplies and a steady stream of morning commuters, Mia slipped through the revolving doors with the confidence of someone who belonged. She'd learned early that appearing lost or uncertain drew unwanted attention, while moving with purpose made adults assume you had every right to be where you were. The lobby was magnificent and intimidating in equal measure, all marble and glass and soaring ceilings that made individual humans seem insignificant by comparison. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks overhead, and the reception desk seemed to stretch for miles, staffed by women whose makeup and clothing suggested they were paid more to look professional than most families earned in months. But there, tucked in a corner near the elevator bank like an afterthought, was indeed a small play area with colorful chairs sized for children and a bookshelf filled with picture books that looked expensive and rarely touched. It was clearly designed more for appearance than actual use, a token gesture toward family friendliness in a building dedicated to the serious business of accumulating wealth and power. Mia settled into a corner with a picture book about farm animals, keeping her eyes on the elevator bank while appearing to read. She didn't have to wait long, and what she witnessed would be burned into her memory forever. The elevator dinged with the soft chime of expensive engineering, and Richard Blackstone stepped out with two men in suits that probably cost more than her mother's annual salary. They were deep in conversation, walking quickly toward the exit with the urgent energy of people conducting business that couldn't wait. As soon as the boy makes his statement, the insurance company will have to pay out the full amount, one of the men was saying, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to winning legal battles through superior resources and ruthless strategy. And if anyone questions the medical records? Asked the other, a nervous edge creeping into his tone. Richard's cold laugh sent shivers down Mia's spine, a sound completely devoid of warmth or humanity. Who's going to question an 8-year-old's testimony about his own accident? Especially one who can barely walk and has the sympathy factor working in his favor. The jury will take one look at those crutches and write us a check. They were almost to the door when Richard added, his voice dropping to a tone that made Mia's blood freeze. Besides, Tommy understands what happens to little boys who don't follow their father's instructions. He's seen what I'm capable of when disappointed. The men left, their expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of money in motion. But Mia remained frozen in her chair, the picture book forgotten in her lap as the full horror of what she'd overheard settled into her young mind. She didn't understand all the words. Insurance and medical records were adult concepts beyond her 5-year-old vocabulary. But she understood enough to know that something terrible was happening. Tommy was being forced to lie about his accident, something connected to money and legal proceedings that would make the Blackstone family even richer than they already were. And if he didn't cooperate, his father would hurt him in ways that Mia's imagination, thankfully, couldn't fully comprehend. A soft ding from the elevator made her look up, her heart racing with a mixture of hope and terror. Tommy emerged alone, moving slowly with his crutches toward the building's exit, each step seeming to require enormous effort. His face was streaked with tears that he kept trying to wipe away with the back of his hand, and he kept looking over his shoulder, as if expecting his father to materialize and drag him back upstairs. This was her chance, perhaps the only opportunity she would get to help him before whatever his father was planning came to fruition. Mia abandoned the picture book and hurried after Tommy, her small legs carrying her across the marble expanse with the determination of someone who understood that lives could be changed by single moments of courage. She caught up with him just as he reached the sidewalk, where the morning sun seemed harsh and unforgiving after the controlled environment of the corporate tower. "Tommy," she called softly, trying not to startle him. He turned, his green eyes widening in surprise that quickly transformed into something approaching relief. "Mia? What are you doing here?" "I heard your daddy talking," Mia said, glancing around to make sure they weren't being watched by security cameras. or the mysterious adults who seem to control every aspect of Tommy's life. He's making you lie about something, isn't he? Tommy's face crumpled like a paper bag, all pretense of courage deserting him in the face of someone who might actually understand his situation. You don't understand. If I don't do what he says, he'll send me away forever. He told me that bad little boys who don't listen get sent to special places where no one can find them, where no one even remembers their names. Mia's heart broke for this scared little boy who had everything money could buy but none of the love and security that every child deserved as their birthright. The contrast with her own life was striking. She might wear secondhand clothes and eat simple meals, but she never doubted that her mother loved her unconditionally and would protect her with fierce devotion. "What kind of lie is he making you tell?" she asked, settling beside him on a concrete planter that provided seating away from the main pedestrian traffic. Tommy looked around nervously, his trained paranoia warring with his desperate need to confide in someone who might believe him. Finally, he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that barely carried over the city noise. "About my accident. He says I have to tell the insurance people that I fell down the stairs at our old house because the builders made them wrong, because they didn't follow safety codes or something. But that's not what happened, Mia. That's not what happened at all. What really happened?" Tommy's voice dropped even lower, barely audible above the traffic and pedestrian noise of downtown Seattle. "He pushed me. My own daddy pushed me down the stairs because I accidentally broke his favorite golf trophy. I tried to tell the doctors when I woke up in the hospital, but no one believed me. They said I was confused because of my head injury, that children often create false memories after trauma." Mia felt physically sick, her young mind struggling to process the enormity of what Tommy was telling her. Not only was Richard Blackstone abusing his son, but he was now planning to profit from that abuse by lying to insurance companies and stealing money that didn't belong to him. "Tommy, you can't lie for him. It's wrong, and it's dangerous, and it makes you part of his stealing. But if I don't, he'll make me disappear," Tommy sobbed, his voice breaking with the kind of fear that comes from intimate knowledge of someone's capacity for cruelty. "And then who will believe me? He's rich and powerful, and I'm just a broken little boy that nobody really cares about." Mia took Tommy's hand, surprised by how cold it was despite the warm morning sunshine. His fingers were thin and pale, marked by the kind of careful manicuring that spoke of household staff rather than parental care. "You're not broken, Tommy. You're brave for surviving this long, and you're smart for knowing that what he's doing is wrong. And you're not alone anymore." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Mia said, her 5-year-old mind working with the clarity that sometimes comes to children who haven't yet learned that some problems are supposed to be too big to solve. That sometimes the smallest people can do the biggest things. "My mama always says that truth is stronger than money, and right is stronger than might even when it doesn't look that way." Tommy wiped his nose with his sleeve, a gesture so normal and childlike that it seemed to break through some of his learned formality. "But what can we do? I'm supposed to give my statement this afternoon at 2 o'clock. If I don't show up, or if I tell the truth instead of his lie, he'll know I betrayed him. Then we make sure the right people hear the real truth before he can hurt you anymore," Mia said with more confidence than she felt, her mind already beginning to formulate a plan that relied more on hope than experience. As they sat on the concrete planter, two children from completely different worlds united by a terrible secret and a shared understanding that sometimes doing the right thing required more courage than most adults possessed. Neither of them noticed the man with the telephoto lens who had been photographing their entire conversation from the coffee shop across the street. Richard Blackstone was about to discover that his son had found an ally, and his carefully constructed plans were in danger of unraveling because of a 5-year-old girl who believed that truth was more powerful than money. The black sedan followed at a careful distance as Mia and Tommy walked slowly through downtown Seattle, Tommy's crutches clicking against the sidewalk in a rhythm that spoke of long practice and permanent adaptation. Mia had suggested they go to Pioneer Square Park, somewhere public where they could talk safely among the lunchtime crowds and street musicians. But Tommy was terrified of being seen with her. "If Daddy finds out I'm talking to anyone about this, especially someone like..." Tommy caught himself, his face reddening with embarrassment. "Someone poor?" Mia finished gently, without any trace of hurt in her voice. She'd learned early that acknowledging differences was often less painful than pretending they didn't exist. "It's okay. I know we're different." "That's not what I meant," Tommy said quickly, his voice carrying genuine distress at the thought that he might have hurt her feelings. "I meant someone nice. Someone who actually cares about me as a person instead of just seeing me as a problem to be managed. Daddy doesn't like it when I talk to nice people. He says they make me weak, that they fill my head with unrealistic expectations about how the world works." They found a bench near the fountain in Memorial Park, where the sound of falling water would mask their conversation from any casual eavesdroppers. The park was busy with office workers on their lunch breaks and tourists taking photos of the scenic backdrop, providing the kind of anonymous crowd that offered both protection and concealment. Tommy set his crutches aside carefully, arranging them within easy reach with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned that mobility aids left carelessly could become weapons in the wrong hands. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket, the expensive fabric of his clothing contrasting sharply with Mia's second-hand sweater and patched jeans. "This is what I'm supposed to read this afternoon," he said, handing the document to Mia with hands that trembled slightly. Even though Mia was still learning to read, working her way through picture books and simple sentences in her kindergarten class, she could make out enough words to understand the basic meaning. The statement claimed that Tommy had fallen down poorly constructed stairs at their previous home, suffering injuries that required extensive medical treatment and would affect him for the rest of his life. It requested millions of dollars in compensation from the construction company's insurance provider. "But you said he pushed you," Mia said, looking up from the paper with the kind of moral clarity that hadn't yet been clouded by adult rationalizations and compromises. Tommy nodded miserably, his green eyes filling with tears that he tried to blink away. "We lived in the old house until I was 6. It was this huge mansion in Bellevue with 3 stories and more rooms than I could count. The stairs were beautiful, all polished wood and brass railings, and I went up and down them hundreds of times without any problems. But that night," his voice trailed off, and Mia waited patiently, understanding instinctively that some stories needed to be told at their own pace. "That night, I was playing in Daddy's study while he was on a business call. I wasn't supposed to be in there, but I liked looking at all his trophies and awards. There was this one golf trophy that he was especially proud of. It was from some tournament where he beat a lot of famous people. It was sitting on the edge of his desk, and when I reached for a book, I accidentally knocked it over. And it broke into a million pieces. The sound was so loud, like an explosion. Daddy came running, and when he saw what happened..." Tommy shuddered at the memory. I'd never seen him so angry. His face turned red, and he started yelling about how I ruined everything I touched, how I was nothing but problems and disappointment, how my mother would be ashamed of the child I'd become. Mia felt her own eyes filling with tears at the cruelty of using a dead mother's memory as a weapon against a child. "So he got angry and pushed you?" "More than angry. He completely lost control. He grabbed me by the shoulders and started shaking me, calling me names that I didn't even understand at the time. Then he picked me up and..." Tommy's voice broke completely. "He threw me down the stairs like I was garbage. I remember the feeling of falling, hitting my head against the wooden steps. And then everything went dark. What happened next? I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. Both my legs were broken in multiple places, and the doctor said I might never walk normally again. There was damage to my spine too, which is why I need the crutches. But when I tried to tell the doctors and nurses what really happened, Daddy was right there beside my bed." Tommy's voice took on the flat, rehearsed quality of someone recounting a story they'd been forced to tell many times. "He said I was confused from the head injury, that I'd had a bad dream while I was unconscious. He explained to everyone that I'd been playing alone and had accidentally fallen down the stairs because I was running too fast and lost my balance. But didn't anyone think it was suspicious? Who was going to question Richard Blackstone? He donated millions to that hospital. There was even a wing named after our family. Plus, I was just a 6-year-old with a head injury. Everyone assumed that children couldn't accurately remember traumatic events." Mia was quiet for a long moment, processing the layers of betrayal and institutional failure that had allowed Tommy's abuse to be covered up so completely. "But now he wants to blame the builders?" Tommy nodded. pulling out another document that looked even more official than the first. 2 years ago, his lawyers found out that the construction company that built our old house has really comprehensive insurance coverage. So Daddy and his legal team concocted this whole elaborate story about how the stairs were built wrong, how they didn't meet safety codes, and how that caused my accident. The insurance company is supposed to pay millions of dollars if they believe it was the builder's fault instead of just an accident. Mia was only 5, but she understood that this was stealing. Stealing with lies, which her mother had taught her was one of the worst kinds of wrong because it hurt multiple people and corrupted the truth itself. Tommy, you can't help him steal that money, and you definitely can't let him keep hurting you or threatening you. But where can I go? Who would believe an 8-year-old against Richard Blackstone? He has lawyers and friends in the police department and judges who owe him favors. If I try to tell the truth, he'll just say I'm confused or lying for attention. Mia thought hard, remembering conversations she'd overheard between her mother and the other cleaning women who worked throughout the city's office buildings and wealthy neighborhoods. What about your mommy? Where is she? Wouldn't she protect you if she knew? Tommy's face grew even sadder if such a thing were possible. She died when I was 7, about a year after my accident. The doctors said it was cancer, but it happened so fast. One day she was fine, the next she was in the hospital, and then she was gone. After that, Daddy became completely different, meaner, more violent. The staff said losing Mommy broke something inside him that was already cracked. What about the staff? Don't they see what he does to you? Housekeepers, drivers, bodyguards, personal assistants, they all work for him, so they have to do what he says or they lose their jobs. And Daddy pays them really well to keep quiet about family business. Plus, he's careful about when and where he hurts me. He makes sure there are never any witnesses. Mia stood up suddenly, pacing in front of the bench with the kind of restless energy that comes from a mind working furiously to solve an impossible problem. Okay, so we can't trust the people who work for him, and we can't trust his friends in important places. But what about other people? What about police officers or doctors who don't owe him anything? He has connections everywhere, Mia. Rich people protect each other, especially when one of them is as powerful as Daddy. They all have secrets they want to keep hidden. Tommy looked at his watch, an expensive gold Rolex that seemed too heavy for his small wrist and too sophisticated for an 8-year-old to need. I have to be back at the office in 2 hours. If I'm late, or if I don't read exactly what's written on that paper, he'll know something is wrong. We'll figure something out, Mia said firmly, though her confidence was largely an act designed to keep Tommy from complete despair. But first, I need to ask you something important. Do you have any proof that he pushed you? Anything that shows what really happened that night? Tommy thought for a moment, his face cycling through hope and disappointment as he considered and rejected various possibilities. Then his eyes widened with sudden realization. The security cameras. Our old house had cameras everywhere because Daddy was always worried about corporate espionage and people trying to steal business secrets or kidnap family members for ransom. Where are those recordings now? Probably destroyed, but wait. Tommy's face lit up with the first genuine hope Mia had seen from him. Marcus. Our old security guard, Marcus Thompson. He was the nicest person in that whole house, always brought me candy and comic books and let me sit with him in the security office to watch the monitors when I was bored. What happened to him? Daddy fired him the day after my accident, said he wasn't doing his job properly, that security had failed to prevent the incident. But Marcus always said he kept personal backups of everything, because rich people like to blame security guards when things go wrong, even when it's not their fault. Do you think Marcus might have kept copies of the recordings from that night? Maybe. He was always talking about protecting himself, making sure he had evidence if anyone tried to make him a scapegoat. And he really cared about me. I think he suspected that something wasn't right about my accident, even if he couldn't prove it at the time. For the first time since they'd met, Tommy looked genuinely hopeful, as if the possibility of justice might actually exist somewhere beyond his father's sphere of influence. But as they sat making plans, their voices low and urgent as they discussed how to contact Marcus without alerting Richard to their activities, neither child noticed the man with the camera phone, who had been recording their entire conversation from behind the newspaper kiosk 30 feet away. The photographs he'd taken would be in Richard Blackstone's hands within the hour, along with a detailed report of everything the children had discussed. And Richard Blackstone was not a man who tolerated challenges to his authority, especially from his own son, and a little girl from the wrong side of town who had no idea how dangerous it was to interfere with the plans of powerful men. The game was about to change, and the stakes were about to become higher than either child could imagine. Within an hour of their conversation in Memorial Park, Richard Blackstone sat in his executive office on the 60th floor of Blackstone Corporate Tower, studying high-definition photographs that had been delivered by his private security team. His face remained perfectly composed as he examined images of his son, talking intimately with a small Asian girl, their heads bent together in obvious conspiracy. "Sir," his head of security, Vincent Cole, stood at attention beside the massive mahogany desk. The surveillance team followed them from the building. "The girl is Mia Chen, age 5, daughter of Lin Chen, who works for Citywide Cleaning Services. They clean our building twice weekly." Richard's fingers drummed silently against the desk surface, a gesture that his employees had learned to recognize as a sign of carefully controlled fury. "How long has this been going on?" "First contact was 3 days ago at Riverside Elementary. The Chen girl approached Master Thomas while he was waiting in the vehicle. Peterson cut off the interaction immediately, but clearly not soon enough. The photographs showed Tommy and Mia in deep conversation, Tommy's emotional state clearly visible even in still images. Richard could see his son's tears, the way he leaned toward the girl as if seeking comfort, the obvious trust that had developed between them in an impossibly short time. What did they discuss today? Vincent consulted his tablet, reading from the surveillance report with military precision. Audio was difficult to capture due to fountain noise, but we have fragments. The subjects discussed Master Thomas's medical history, the upcoming insurance deposition, and apparently someone named Marcus Thompson, former security personnel. Richard's expression darkened at the mention of Marcus. He'd fired the security guard specifically because the man had asked too many questions about Tommy's accident, showing an inappropriate level of concern for a mere employee. If Marcus had indeed kept security footage as insurance against potential litigation. "Sir, there's more. The Chen girl appears to be encouraging Master Thomas to deviate from the planned testimony. Our lip reader confirms that she used phrases like, 'You can't lie for him,' and 'It's wrong and dangerous.'" Richard stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Seattle's skyline. 60 floors below, ordinary people went about their insignificant lives, unaware that their economic futures often depended on decisions made in rooms like this one. He'd built his empire by understanding that power meant control of information, control of narratives, and most importantly, control of people. "Tommy's deposition is scheduled for 2 o'clock, Richard said quietly, his voice carrying the calm certainty of someone accustomed to having his will implemented without question. "That gives us 3 hours to address this complication. What are your instructions, sir?" Richard turned back to face Vincent, his expression revealing nothing of the calculations taking place behind his cold blue eyes. "First, I want complete files on Lin Chen and her daughter. Employment history, financial status, immigration status if applicable, any vulnerabilities we can exploit. Second, locate Marcus Thompson immediately. I want to know where he lives, where he works, who he associates with. And the children? We'll be separated permanently. Tommy needs to understand that his temporary friendship was a luxury he can no longer afford." Richard returned to his desk and opened a locked drawer, removing a document that had been prepared months ago but never used. "Have legal prepare termination papers for Lin Chen effective immediately. Citywide Cleaning will be informed that her services are no longer required due to security concerns." Vincent nodded, making notes on his tablet. "That should remove the girl's access to the building and eliminate opportunities for contact. It's a start. But Tommy's loyalty appears to have been compromised more deeply than I anticipated. He'll require more direct motivation to ensure his compliance." The intercom on Richard's desk buzzed softly. "Mr. Blackstone, Master Thomas has returned from lunch. Shall I send him up?" "Yes, immediately." As Vincent left to implement his instructions, Richard prepared for a conversation that would determine whether his son understood the true nature of power and consequence. The insurance settlement represented more than money. It was proof of his ability to reshape reality according to his will, to transform his own criminal violence into someone else's legal liability. 10 minutes later, Tommy entered the office, his crutches clicking against the polished marble floor. The boy's face still showed traces of hope from his conversation with Mia, an expression that Richard found both pathetic and infuriating. "Sit," Richard commanded, gesturing to the chair positioned directly across from his desk. Tommy complied, setting his crutches aside with practiced efficiency. "Daddy, I know about your new friend," Richard interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "I know about your conversation in the park, your discussion of our family's private business, and your apparent willingness to betray everything I've taught you about loyalty and discretion." Tommy's face went white, hope draining away like water from a broken container. "I didn't tell her anything that... You told her everything?" Richard leaned forward, his presence seeming to fill the space between them. "You discussed your accident, my instructions regarding your testimony, and you even mentioned Marcus Thompson. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? How did you..." "Because I own this city, Tommy. I have eyes and ears everywhere, and nothing happens that I don't know about within hours. Your little friend and her mother are already being dealt with." Terror flooded Tommy's green eyes. "What do you mean, dealt with?" "Lin Chen has been terminated from her employment effective immediately. She'll find it very difficult to secure new work once word spreads about her daughter's inappropriate behavior toward the Blackstone family. As for Mia herself..." Richard let the threat hang in the air, watching as his son's face cycled through horror and desperation. "Please don't hurt her," Tommy whispered. "She was just trying to help me. She doesn't understand. She understands enough to interfere with my business, and you understand enough to know that actions have consequences." Richard opened another drawer and removed a small digital tablet, setting it on the desk where Tommy could see the screen. "Your deposition begins in 90 minutes. You will read the statement exactly as written without deviation or hesitation. You will convince the insurance investigators that the construction company's negligence caused your injuries. And if I don't..." Richard touched the tablet screen, bringing up a live video feed that made Tommy gasp in recognition. The camera showed Lin Chen being escorted from the Blackstone building by security guards, her arms full of personal belongings and cleaning supplies. Even from the awkward angle, her confusion and distress were clearly visible. "Your friend's mother has lost her job because of your indiscretion. But employment termination is merely the beginning of what I can do to people who cross me." Richard's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Lin Chen is an immigrant, Tommy. Her legal status depends on maintaining steady employment and staying out of trouble with authorities. One phone call from me to the right government office and she and her daughter could find themselves on a plane back to China within 48 hours. Tommy's hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles went white. "You can't do that. They haven't done anything wrong. I can do whatever I choose because I have the power and resources to reshape reality according to my needs. Lin Chen's work visa can be revoked for security violations. Mia can be reported to Child Protective Services as an unsupervised minor wandering downtown areas inappropriately. There are a dozen ways to destroy their lives legally and completely. But they're innocent. Innocence is a luxury that only exists when powerful people allow it to exist." Richard leaned back in his chair, satisfied that his message was being received clearly. "You have a choice, Tommy. You can cooperate with my plans, read your statement convincingly, and help our family collect the compensation we deserve. Or you can continue your rebellion and watch as every person who showed you kindness pays the price for your selfishness." Tommy sat in stunned silence, the full scope of his father's ruthlessness finally becoming clear. This wasn't just about money or insurance fraud. It was about absolute control, about ensuring that even his own son understood the futility of resistance. "I need your answer now," Richard continued. "Will you fulfill your family obligations, or will you force me to demonstrate exactly how much damage I can cause to innocent people?" Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Tommy could see the city spread out below. Millions of people living their lives in ignorance of the casual cruelty being planned in corporate boardrooms. Somewhere down there, Mia was probably wondering if she'd helped him or made everything worse. "I'll do it," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you clearly. I'll read the statement, Tommy said louder, each word feeling like a nail in his own coffin. I'll tell them the builders caused my accident. Richard smiled with genuine satisfaction. Excellent. Vincent will escort you to the legal department for final preparation. Remember, Tommy, this is what family loyalty looks like. This is how Blackstones protect their interests. As Tommy struggled to his feet and reached for his crutches, Richard added one final instruction. And if you're considering any last-minute changes of heart, remember that I'll be watching. Any deviation from the script, any attempt to contact your little friend or her mother, and the consequences will be immediate and permanent. Tommy nodded without speaking and made his way toward the door, each step on his crutches echoing like gunshots in the marble-lined office. Behind him, Richard was already making phone calls to ensure that every aspect of his plan proceeded without interference. But neither father nor son knew that Marcus Thompson had been watching the Blackstone building for weeks, waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. And in a small apartment across town, Mia Chen was about to discover that sometimes the most powerful allies come from the most unexpected places. 2 hours before Tommy's scheduled deposition, Marcus Thompson sat in his modest apartment in the Georgetown neighborhood, studying security footage on a computer screen that had cost him 3 months' salary from his new job as a night watchman at a warehouse complex. The images were from 2 years ago, but they remained as clear and damning as the day he'd copied them from the Blackstone Estate's security system. Marcus was a 45-year-old former Marine, whose weathered face and calloused hands spoke of years spent protecting other people's property and secrets. After losing his position at the Blackstone Estate, he'd struggled to find comparable employment, his termination from such a prestigious job raising questions that potential employers preferred not to investigate. But he'd never forgotten Tommy Blackstone, the sweet little boy who'd spent countless hours in the security office, asking questions about the monitors and sharing stories about his toys and books. Marcus had watched that child transform from a happy, curious toddler into a frightened, withdrawn victim of systematic abuse. The security footage showed everything. Richard Blackstone entering his study at 10:47 p.m., clearly intoxicated based on his unsteady movement and aggressive body language. Tommy following 20 minutes later, drawn by curiosity about the room that was normally forbidden to him. The broken trophy scattered in pieces across the expensive carpet. Richard's explosive reaction, grabbing his 6-year-old son and shaking him violently before hurling the small body down the stairs with devastating force. Marcus had made copies of this footage the day after the accident, some instinct warning him that Richard would eventually try to destroy evidence of his crime. When he'd been fired and escorted from the property by private security, the backup drives had been hidden in his personal belongings, insurance against the day when he might need to protect himself from false accusations. He'd tried to report what he'd witnessed to authorities 2 years ago, but Richard's connections had ensured that his allegations were dismissed as the bitter accusations of a disgruntled former employee. Police investigators who owed their promotions to Blackstone family donations had found his evidence inconclusive and warned him about making false accusations against prominent citizens. His phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. Thompson speaking. Mr. Thompson, this is Mia Chen. You don't know me, but I need to talk to you about Tommy Blackstone. Marcus sat up straighter, his military training causing him to automatically scan his apartment for potential surveillance devices. How did you get this number, kid? I looked you up in the phone book at the library. There were 3 Marcus Thompsons, but you were the only one who lived close enough to the Blackstone building to watch it sometimes. The observation demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that impressed Marcus, despite his caution. What makes you think I watch the building? Because you care about Tommy, and caring people keep track of the people they worry about. Will you meet me? I think I can help him, but I need someone who knows the truth. Marcus hesitated, weighing the risks of involvement against the moral obligation he'd carried for 2 years. Where are you calling from? The payphone at Chang's Market on Beacon Hill. My mama just lost her job because Tommy's daddy found out we were friends. But I think Tommy's in trouble today. Worse trouble than before. The urgency in the child's voice convinced Marcus that whatever was happening, it was reaching a critical point. Stay where you are. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Marcus gathered the security footage, printed documents, and other evidence he'd compiled over the years, placing everything in a briefcase that had once held his Marine Corps commendations. If he was going to take on Richard Blackstone, he needed to be prepared for total warfare. 25 minutes later, he found Mia waiting outside Chang's market, clutching a stuffed rabbit and watching every car that passed with the hypervigilance of someone who'd learned that danger could arrive without warning. Despite her obvious fear, she approached his truck with determined steps. "You're Marcus," she said with certainty, not bothering with questions. "And you're the kid who's been talking to Tommy. Get in. We need to go somewhere private." Marcus drove to Lincoln Park, where they could sit on a bench overlooking Puget Sound and talk without worrying about electronic surveillance. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the salt smell of the ocean and the distant sound of ferry horns. "Tell me everything," Marcus said, opening his briefcase to reveal thick folders and computer equipment. Mia began with her first encounter with Tommy at the school fence, describing each subsequent meeting with the precise detail of someone who understood that every fact might be important. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally making notes or asking for clarification about specific conversations. "Tommy's supposed to give his statement this afternoon," Mia concluded. "His daddy is making him lie about what really happened, and if he doesn't cooperate, Mr. Blackstone said he'll hurt me and my mama." Marcus opened his laptop and turned the screen toward Mia. "This is what really happened the night Tommy was injured." The security footage played in stark black and white, showing Richard's drunken rage and violent assault on his own child with horrible clarity. Mia watched in stunned silence, her young mind struggling to process the deliberate cruelty captured by the unblinking camera. "You have proof," she whispered. "I have evidence. But proof requires someone willing to present it to authorities who will act on it, and that's been the problem for 2 years. Richard Blackstone has too many friends in important places. But if people saw this video, they'd see what we want them to see, but Richard has lawyers who could argue that the footage was altered, that the timestamps were manipulated, that I'm a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. Without corroborating evidence or witness testimony, this alone might not be enough." Mia was quiet for several minutes, staring out at the water while her mind worked through possibilities. What if Tommy told the truth instead of lying? What if he refused to read his daddy's statement? Then Richard would probably withdraw the insurance claim and find other ways to punish Tommy for disobedience. The boy would still be trapped in an abusive situation, just without the added burden of committing perjury. But what if Tommy told the truth and people saw your video at the same time? What if there were lots of people watching who couldn't be scared or bought off? Marcus turned to study Mia's face, recognizing the expression of someone developing a dangerous plan. "What are you thinking? Tommy's statement is happening at the law offices downtown, right? In a room with insurance people and lawyers and maybe other important people." "Yes, but those aren't the kind of people who'll stand up to Richard Blackstone. They're all part of the same system that protects wealthy criminals." "What about reporters? What about people who tell stories on TV and in newspapers? Would they be interested in a story about a rich man who hurt his own little boy and then tried to steal money by lying about it?" Marcus felt a spark of excitement as he began to understand Mia's strategy. "You're talking about making this public, forcing the story into the open where it can't be covered up. My mama always watches the news people who try to help regular people when powerful people hurt them. There's a lady on Channel 7 who does stories about unfair things happening to families. Would she want to know about Tommy?" "Jessica Rodriguez. Yes, she's built a career on exposing corruption and abuse among Seattle's elite. But getting media attention requires evidence and witnesses, and we'd need to coordinate everything perfectly." Mia stood up from the bench, her small frame radiating determination. "Then we better start making phone calls. Tommy's running out of time, and I'm not going to let his daddy hurt him anymore." As Marcus watched this 5-year-old girl prepare to take on one of the most powerful men in Seattle, he realized that sometimes the most unlikely people became heroes simply because they refused to accept that injustice was inevitable. The next few hours would determine whether courage and truth could triumph over money and influence, or whether Tommy Blackstone would be forced to live the rest of his life as both victim and accomplice to his father's crimes. At 1:45 p.m., Jessica Rodriguez and her camera crew positioned themselves across the street from the law offices of Sterling Whitman and Associates, where Tommy's deposition was scheduled to take place. Marcus had provided her with copies of the security footage, detailed documentation of Richard Blackstone's abusive behavior, and a timeline of events that painted a picture of systematic child abuse covered up by wealth and influence. "This is either going to be the story of the year, or we're about to get sued into oblivion," Jessica murmured to her cameraman as they checked their equipment one final time. Inside the law firm's conference room, Tommy sat between his father and a team of expensive attorneys, his small hands folded in his lap as he stared at the prepared statement. The insurance company's representatives had already expressed their sympathy for his tragic accident and their eagerness to resolve the matter quickly and fairly. "Master Blackstone," the lead insurance investigator said gently, "I know this is difficult, but we just need you to tell us in your own words what happened the night you were injured." Tommy looked at his father, who nodded encouragingly while his eyes conveyed unmistakable threat. The boy took a shaky breath and began to read from the script he'd memorized. "On the night of October 15th, 2 years ago, I was playing in our house when I decided to go upstairs to get a book from my room. The stairs were dark, and I was running because I was excited about the story I wanted to read. But even as Tommy spoke the rehearsed lies, his mind was filled with images of Mia's determined face, her absolute conviction that telling the truth was more important than avoiding consequences. She had risked her own safety and her mother's livelihood to help him, showing more courage in 5 years than he had managed in 8. And when I reached the top step, my foot slipped because the wood was uneven and poorly constructed. I fell backward, hitting my head and legs on the sharp edges of the stairs. 3 blocks away, Mia sat in Marcus's truck, listening to police scanner traffic and watching for any sign that their plan was working. They had called Child Protective Services, the FBI's white-collar crime division, and every media outlet in Seattle, providing evidence and coordinates for what they promised would be the exposure of massive insurance fraud and child abuse. "Tommy, you don't have to keep lying," Mia whispered to herself, willing her friend to find the courage she knew he possessed. Back in the conference room, Tommy continued his false testimony, but his voice was growing weaker with each fabricated detail. The insurance representatives were nodding sympathetically, clearly convinced by the tragic story of a little boy victimized by corporate negligence. "And that's why I can't walk normally anymore. Because the builders didn't make the stairs safe like they were supposed to," Tommy concluded, his voice barely audible. "Thank you for your courage in sharing this painful experience," the investigator said. "Based on your testimony and the medical records, we're prepared to approve a settlement in the amount of—" "That's not what happened." The words came out so quietly that everyone in the room had to strain to hear them. Richard's face went white, then red, as he realized what his son had just said. "I'm sorry, son, could you repeat that?" the investigator asked kindly. Tommy looked directly at his father, seeing the murderous rage building behind the man's carefully controlled facade. But instead of the familiar terror, Tommy felt something new, a strength borrowed from a little girl who believed that truth was more powerful than fear. "That's not what happened," Tommy said louder, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I didn't fall down the stairs because they were built wrong. I fell because my daddy pushed me." The silence in the room was deafening. Richard started to speak, but Tommy continued, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. "I broke his golf trophy by accident, and he got really angry and threw me down the stairs. The stairs were fine. I'd been up and down them hundreds of times. But he hurt me on purpose, and then he made everyone believe it was an accident." "Tommy," Richard said in a warning voice, "you're confused. The head injury—" "I'm not confused anymore," Tommy said, turning to face the insurance investigators. "My daddy has been making me practice lying to you for weeks. He said if I didn't tell you the builders did it, he would hurt my friend Mia and her mama. But Mia told me that telling the truth is more important than being scared." The conference room erupted in chaos. Richard's lawyers immediately called for a recess, demanding time to consult with their client. The insurance investigators began requesting clarification on Tommy's new testimony. Security was called to maintain order. "This session is suspended pending further investigation," announced the lead investigator. "Master Blackstone will need to be interviewed by Child Protective Services before we can proceed." As the room cleared, Richard leaned close to his son, his voice barely audible but filled with venom. "You have no idea what you've just done, boy. No idea at all. But Tommy, for the first time in his life, wasn't afraid of his father's threats. He'd found something more powerful than fear, the knowledge that he was no longer alone. 3 days later, after formal investigations by both CPS and the prosecutor's office had corroborated Tommy's testimony with Marcus's security footage, Richard Blackstone was arrested at his corporate headquarters in front of dozens of employees and news cameras. Tommy was immediately placed in protective custody, while Child Protective Services began the process of finding him a safe, permanent home. The insurance company not only denied the fraudulent claim, but initiated their own criminal investigation into Richard's business practices. 2 months later, after extensive legal proceedings and psychological evaluations, Mia visited Tommy at his new foster home, a warm, loving household where children were valued for who they were rather than what they could provide. Tommy still used his crutches, and probably always would, but his green eyes had lost their constant terror and begun to show glimpses of the happy child he might have been. "You were right," Tommy told Mia as they sat in the foster family's backyard, watching other children play. "Truth really is stronger than money. My mama says that good things happen when brave people decide to do what's right," Mia replied, hugging Mr. Patches. "And you were the bravest person of all, because you told the truth even when you were scared." Tommy smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "I couldn't have done it without you. You showed me that being poor doesn't mean being powerless, and being rich doesn't mean being right." In the weeks and months that followed, Richard Blackstone's conviction became a landmark case for prosecuting wealthy abusers who had previously been protected by their status and resources. Marcus Thompson received recognition for his patient evidence gathering and his courage in finally coming forward. Lin Chen found new employment with a company that valued her integrity and work ethic. But perhaps most importantly, Tommy Blackstone learned that family isn't defined by blood or money, but by the people who choose to love and protect you. And Mia Chen discovered that sometimes the smallest voices can speak the loudest truths, especially when they refuse to be silenced by fear. The friendship that began across a chain-link fence had grown into something powerful enough to topple an empire built on cruelty and lies. And in a world where money often seemed to matter more than morality, 2 children had proven that courage and compassion could still change everything.